Hello, this is Maxine Ingwall bringing you another Out and About with Max program. This is made possible by using the magic, talent, and expertise of Liz and Matt, the staff at HCVN Channel 10. They combined an audio tape of an interview I did years ago with present-day video off the internet. The guest interviewed was Tony Bouza, who was the chief of police in Minneapolis at that time. When he graciously agreed to do the interview, Tony told me he would like to record the program in his office, which was located in the police facilities in downtown Minneapolis. So we met there. I couldn't help but notice the walls were covered with merit awards, and once said Tony Bouza was the best chief of police that New York City ever had. A highlight of being with Chief Bouza was when he took me on a tour of the building. I was amazed at the size of the fully equipped gym. Officers were there doing exercises and training. I also couldn't help noticing the number of female and mixed nationality officers that were working out. A special treat was visiting the K-9 unit and seeing the officers working with their dogs. It seemed to me like even just a blink of the officer's eye would signal a command to what their dog should do. We also spent some time in the shooting range, where officers were practicing their skills aiming at targets. It was interesting how many landed right on the mark. Something that really impressed me was the respect and rapport between the chief and his officers. He called each one by their first name as we met them on our visits. I found him to be quite an amazing person. He wrote several books. He'd accomplished a lot in his life, and he was a person with a great sense of humor. The interview started like this.
My guest today is a gentleman that we often hear about. We read about him in the paper, and we see him on TV. He's a busy man, but you know, when I contacted him to ask if he'd do a radio program with me, he graciously consented right away. I want to thank you very much, Minneapolis Police Chief Tony Bouza, for sharing the KDUZ microphone with me.
Well, I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to my fellow Minnesotans. I think it's gracious of you to offer.
When I asked him if he was a patient person, his response brings out his great sense of humor.
Well, I think some people would say I'm spastic and comatose and unconscious, and I lack the imagination to understand all the awful things that are going on around me, so I kind of just mope through life, not taking myself too seriously and trying not to take the things around me too seriously. But it's probably a failure of imagination. I probably don't really realize what's going on.
Chief Bouza was born in Spain, came to the United States not speaking a word of English, and he wound up being a cop in New York City.
Well, unfortunately, I was born in Spain. I had hoped to be born to an English Oxford Don because I have a tremendous passion for the English language. I'm constantly experimenting with it. And I was really kind of shocked on October 4th, 1928, the very same year that Walter Disney created Mickey Mouse, and now I have spent my entire life overshadowed by a miserable rodent. I was shocked to awaken to a bunch of ignorant Spanish peasants speaking this strange language, and I had to adjust to that, but I really was born in the northwest corner of Spain, October 4th, 1928, and my father was a seaman who came to this country to work, went back to get married and to have children, and then when I was 9, he brought us over here, and then he died when I was 15, and then my mother had to go to work, and my sister married a cop, and that's how I became a cop. And I had to go to work, and we all had to go to work.
His remarks about the advantages and opportunities that we have in this country.
So it's been a struggle, but I'm living proof what a great country this really is. That an immigrant can come here ignorant, and nobody was more ignorant than I was, poor, not speaking the language, and just because of the wonderful opportunities that this marvelous nation of ours offers, I have managed to reach the top of my profession, and that's really a miracle. That's just amazing to me. And I figure one of these days they're going to discover what a hideous, jerky little cretin I really am and throw me out on my bottom.
Well, you mastered the English language beautifully for somebody that grew up speaking Spanish.
Well, I think I had an advantage, to be honest, over those who are born to the language. You take for granted. It's like being born in this country. Look at all the people that are born in this country and can't see the opportunities in front of them. I was born in Spain. I came to this country. People say, well, gee, you didn't have the advantage. In fact, I had every advantage. I had the advantage of being able to see the contrast. I could go back to Spain and see that I'd be in the fields pulling potatoes out of the ground. Here, if I applied myself and worked a little bit and studied a little bit and made an effort, I can get to be chief of police. I can educate my children. I can live in a comfortable house. So the reality, and English is the same. Not having been born to English and struggling with it and learning it relatively late in life, taught me what a rich, textured, complex, fascinating language it is. To read Shakespeare in his native language is one of the greatest privileges that I can imagine for anyone. It's almost like being able to read Greeks in their native language, or Cicero, or Horace in Latin. That's just a wonderful thing.
A New York City veteran cop has been picked to be the next chief of the Minneapolis Police Department. Mayor Don Fraser chose Anthony Bouza, who says there will be no politics in his police department.
Bouza from New York City is a police veteran with 27 years experience. He is also a college professor. Mayor Fraser says he expects Bouza to do such a good job there will be no need for political meddling in the police department. Bouza said depoliticizing the department was his biggest concern.
Tony shares what brought them to Minneapolis.
Oh, that's easy. Everybody invents their own lives. I think people invent all these wonderful lies about themselves. I'm sure that, people leave the police chief's job and they say, well, I've righted the ship of state. It was kind of sinking and I finally bailed it out, and now that it's on course, I'm going to leave. Nothing like that. I had failed at one thing after another, and was desperately looking for a job, and I saw this advertisement in the welfare office while I was applying for welfare, and I applied, and these people were gullible enough to believe the resume that I had concocted for $200. It's a pure fiction, and on the basis of that, I've been here ever since for 7.5 years. It's been glorious.
I hope you and Erica have been happy with your decision to come to the Twin Cities area. It's one of my favorite parts of the whole country.
Just as in Clockwork Orange, a dehumanized and impersonal society is brutalizing and conditioning its citizens, so do we have poverty, the lack of education, the inability to articulate, alcoholism, unemployment, inadequate housing, and all of the desperate conditions of the ghetto, fundamentally conditioning our citizens in that ghetto to resolve their disputes violently.
What he says about crime remains timely today.
Well, Tony, I guess it's no secret that crime appears to be on the increase. Do you think there's any particular reason for that?
I think there are a lot of reasons for it, and I think the reasons are unfortunate, and I think it's going to get worse because we have not addressed the dilemma, the unique and peculiar experience of blacks in this country. We have not fully integrated them into American society, and until we do, we're going to experience a tremendous amount of criminality. Blacks are the principal victims of crime in this country. They're the principal perpetrators of crime, and the whites are responsible for that, and I think we have to recognize that. We also have a large homeless population adrift and loose in this country, mentally disturbed, alcoholics, human graffiti, that kind of give you the sense of decay and dissolution of the society. We have explosive growth in the teenage population that is at risk, Native Americans, black youth. And we have in-migration from other cities, people looking for jobs and safety here, from Gary, Indiana, Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland, and places like that, and coming here looking for jobs and hope and education and safety, and winding up on welfare and in jail. We have some very serious problems. They're not going to get better because the demographics are against us, and this area is now experiencing explosive growth.
I think you will especially enjoy his remarks about family and the ones about his mother.
Well, how many were there in your family, brothers and sisters?
Well, my father, as I said, died when I was 15. He was 54. He was substantially older than my mother, who was still alive. So I have my mother going on 86, living in Brooklyn, and I happy retirement, although I'm trying to find some suitable job for her. She used to look. Operators wanted was the word. Those are the two words by which we lived. If we saw in a building operators wanted, my mother would go up there and work on sewing machines. That's what she did. She was a sewing machine operator. So that became operators wanted. Got to be a big phrase in our lives. And now I'm trying to coax her to go back to work because we could all use the money. And then there's my sister, and she had a daughter who became a police officer. And who is now just retired. So I'm the last member of the family to be a cop. It was my sister marrying a cop that got me in the business. I had a very low opinion of myself, and I figured I needed, I went to see a play once called Death of a Salesman when I was young, and I was in the garment center, and I saw that, and I thought, my God, Willie Loman, that's me, that's my life. Oh. And I almost killed myself, so I thought I better get out of the rag business. I was in the garment center. It was awful, horrible place. All kinds of distorted, sick values. It was corrosive to the spirit. So I thought I better get into something secure like civil service. So I told my mother, I'm going to go and take the sanitation man's examination. She said, no. She said, take the police exam. She's a very powerful lady. She said, if Henry, your brother-in-law, can be a cop, anybody can be a cop. You can be a cop. So I said, all right. So I studied hard and prepared myself. I stopped smoking, went into training, and for the first time in my life, really applied myself to an experience.
I hope we have a lot of young people listening to us today, because I feel one of the bad failings American people have is they don't recognize what a wonderful opportunity. And any young person in this day and age that says they can't make it, it's admitting a sense of defeat before they even try.
Well, I think they're plain nuts. The opportunities are there to be seen, but you've got to work hard and you've got to study hard. You've got to put out. You've got to sweat and strain. I try to get by on sweet talk and charm. It didn't get me anywhere, and I went about 20 years struggling with it.
Tony talked about turning his charm on a lovely young lady named Erica.
I was kidnapped by this rapacious female who has been leading my life for 30 years. I was going my merry way, and she almost literally kidnapped me and bought my services for 30 years, and here I am 30 years later.
Well, now let's have the straight story, Tony. Just how did you and Erica meet?
Well, actually a friend had been trying very hard to get us together, and my schedule was very tough. I was 27, this is 1956, and a very tough schedule, and well, finally she did arrange a meeting and a party, and we met at this party. And Erica says, and she could tell you herself because she's here now, that she.
So you better tell the truth.
Yeah, she says she looked across the room and she saw my beautiful face and said, "That's the man I want to marry." So you can see that her head was turned by a pretty face, without any thought to any character that I might have, or intelligence, or prospects. And the fact that I was making a fast $3,300 a year didn't impress her very much, but she was willing to take the chance anyway.
We spoke of her making jewelry. She did come to Hutchinson and had a booth at one of our arts and crafts.
Well, before we get away from Erica entirely, she is a very talented lady. She makes beautiful jewelry.
Well, I don't know beautiful jewelry, but she makes very distinctive jewelry. It's called cheap junk costume jewelry, and which she hammers away every single night. I go to bed to the rhythmic clanging of an enormous hammer on an anvil as she takes beautiful objects of gold and silver and turns them into these hideous things that she peddles to gullible Midwesterners. And as long as the supply of gullible Midwesterners holds up, we'll continue to make a couple of bucks here and there.
You know, why I decided you couldn't be all bad is because I read an article in the paper that you even attended shop for her one day at a craft affair.
I did do that.
When she was otherwise indisposed, I guess we won't go into that.
No, I didn't want to do that, actually, but she made me do it. I have been kind of the wimpish spirit behind her. She's an overpoweringly powerful woman. I went to visit her in jail. She was in jail. This was only the second time. People think that she's in jail all the time. I'm sorry to say that is not true. She's only in jail occasionally. This was only the second time that she was in jail. She was there for 10 days for demonstrating against the defense policies of Honeywell. And she was organizing a mass escape when I got there, and baking cakes full of sores, and simply ordered me to go to Brainerd. I didn't want to do it, and I wouldn't have done it given my own choice.
I think we should point out that anyone should admire someone like your wife that has the courage of strong convictions. Too many of us are willing to think one thing and then do another, so I do admire her.
I think she's totally crazy, but she does have guts.
America attacks the problems that it sees. To the degree that I succeed in keeping it cool, and keeping the ghetto cool, to the degree that I can be effective, to that degree, fundamentally, am I deflecting America's attention from discovering this cancer. And the longer it is deferred, the discovery, as in Vietnam, the greater the moral dilemma and the greater the moral problem when it is ultimately discovered. So maybe I would be better off failing. Maybe I'd be better off not working quite as hard. Maybe I'd be better off not being as effective as I presume myself to be.
I asked if we as citizens were doing enough to help the situation.
Well, that is a question that would really only occur to a Minnesotan or a Midwesterner, and that is the key to the whole operation here. The citizens do care, they do get involved, and they do tend to police themselves, and that makes for a much, much safer society. Block clubs, community crime prevention, neighborhood organization, sense of community, joining the Elks, the Rotarians, all those community neighborhood organizations, Kiwanis and Lions. All of that social glue, all of that sense of unity is what makes the Midwestern unique. The religious experience, the influence of the churches, clubs, social, fraternal, charitable organizations, tremendously homogeneous, organized, tight. That's what makes this community safe, not the number of cops. So the more we see of that, the better. The more involvement, the more volunteerism. Every citizen is a volunteer. Every organization, look around you. Every hospital, library, police department, educational institution is basically sustained by volunteers who ask for nothing but the ability to contribute and the opportunity to participate. That makes all the difference in the world. So, yes, I think the citizens can do more. They're doing wonderfully well, and there's nowhere in this country that people are doing more than here. Obviously, we must all do more.
These are the remarks he made about gun control.
The handgun issue in this country is one of the great and scandalous disgraces of this nation. No other society would tolerate it. 20,000 deaths every year through murder, suicide, and accidents, handguns. The NRA is really, in my judgment, irresponsible and a bit crazy in that it is attempting to arm every man, woman, and child in this country with machine guns. What is going on in California, I predicted years ago that every traffic incident would wind up in a gun battle if we pursue the NRA policies. We must have national handgun control legislation of the toughest imaginable quality. Canada this year will have a tiny fraction of the numbers of deaths that we have from handguns. Europe, Japan, no civilized nation would tolerate the proliferation of handguns. We are involved in an armaments race with ourselves that is as crazy as the armaments race is internationally. Only ours is deadlier because it's taking 20,000 lives every year.
So what I would say is, America, take a look around. Look what you're doing in your ghettos. You're creating a permanent underclass of disaffected and poor, drugged on alcohol, on welfare, living in bombed-out situations, an educational system that doesn't educate, a bureaucracy that doesn't respond, the sanitation doesn't clean, the police don't police. We're all here, we're all very visible, and I suppose some of us are working reasonably hard, but the fact of the matter is we're all failing, and it's just a holding operation. Look around you.
He talked about Hutchinson and our police department.
Well, I think you're familiar with our local Hutchinson Police Department, we have a fine staff of about 30 dedicated men and women.
Graduated women, right on.
And some of our officers have been injured, and
Sure.
and I know many of your men have been lost their lives in their
Yes.
duties. And I don't think we thank you and your men enough, and the women, as we said. Are you recruiting all the time for
All the time,
new
yes.
police officers?
September the 24th, I will be hiring 36 new police officers.
So we do have good resources, good material coming along.
Wonderful. There is no state in the United States that has better police officers than Minnesota, and I can prove it because our standards are higher than anywhere. We require that police officers have 2 years of university training with a background in law and forensics and police science. Then we put them through a very intensive 10-week basic training course. Then we require them to take a licensing examination. And then we first hire them, and then we train them for 6 months and evaluate them very carefully. We weed out the unfit very, very carefully. We don't allow criminals, psychos, or misfits to come in. And I think that the result is that we in Minnesota, Hutchinson as well as Minneapolis, every town in the state is getting the highest quality candidates for the policing in the United States. We are very lucky, and it's all due to a very sensible legislation passed just 10 years ago called Peace Officer Standards and Training Act, which established the standards for the police officers in this state and placed them in the highest in the nation.
You look at the average policeman, and he comes from the lower middle class or upper lower class, and suddenly he's going to become a policeman. He wants security, he wants a nice paying job, he wants to work out of doors, he wants to help people. He is going to don this uniform, and he is going to go out into the streets of our city, and he is going to help people. And then he gets out there and he suddenly discovers that he's regulating human behavior, that he is bitterly resented, and he's shocked. Police officers' reaction to this is absolute shock, that a citizen, and I mean the citizen generically, should resent his presence, and he does, and it is resented, and it is resented rightly. We all bridle at control. He becomes a bit cynical, he becomes a bit hardened. He cannot permit every emotional contact to drain him. He has to have emotions for his life and for his family. So we have the outside world and we have the police world, and we experience our reality, and the real world experiences its reality, and it is terribly difficult for any citizen to understand the complexities involved in police work. The public doesn't understand everything that you see. You cannot even explain it. And this really creates a kind of ineluctable drift that I don't know how to combat.
Tony's quite a philosopher. Here are some of his quotes.
It's really rather simple. It has to be tortured and full of self-doubt and Socratic. You're not going to get out of this world alive anyway, so you can afford to alienate all but 6, because you're going to need pallbearers at the end, so you want to at least salvage 6 people to carry you into the ground. But that's about all. It doesn't matter if you alienate the rest. Fight for what you think is right. This is a great country. You can still do the right thing and succeed. So following your conscience doesn't mean you're going to fail. Getting along and going along doesn't mean that you're going to succeed. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take the things around you too seriously. Bring a sense of humor and levity. Use the talents of others. God knows I have exploited everyone around me all my life, and if I had to rely on my own talent, I wouldn't have gotten very far. But be tortured and full of self-doubt. Don't engage in self-pity. Strike at your ego every day. Every day you should get up and say to yourself, I'm going to give my ego another hammer blow today, and try to thicken my skin a little bit and not take things too personally. And remember that we are here to serve the people, not ourselves and not our private interests. And that the people will take care of you, and they've taken care of me very nicely, so I don't... and I don't wallow in self-pity, and I try to think things objectively. And now, as I reach the twilight of my career, because I'm not going to be reappointed, this is the end of my term, and unless the posse gets to either of us first, Reagan and I go out together at the end of '88, I can say that it has been a very lucky career in the main. I have worked hard and studied hard and tried to do my best, but so have a lot of other people, and I have been rewarded to date out of all proportion to my worth. There is no doubt that I have been treated better than I deserve.
Bouza admitted that Sergeant Dennis Yerxa, the man who testified that fellow officers kicked a prisoner, was getting rough treatment from other cops. The chief compared the situation to the Serpico story, the story about the New York cop who turned in his buddies. Bouza knows that story because he helped put in police reforms in New York after the Serpico allegations were investigated by a panel.
I wonder if you know what you would get if you spoke to Serpico after he launched a series of reforms that absolutely cataclysmically shook the New York City Police Department. He also would say that he went through a great deal of pain and anguish and difficulty and problems and tremendous peer pressures, and all those of you who saw the movie would remember what happened. There's just no reform without this kind of pain and struggle.
We spoke of his not being reappointed as Minneapolis Chief of Police and asked about future plans.
Well, I was going to ask what the top cop planned to do next year. Are we going to be seeing your name on an election ballot? It's been rumored, you know.
Yes, I pray not. I will say never, because I'm a dutiful sort and I do my duty, and if I saw it as my plain duty to do one thing or another, I would do it, which I know sounds like a very political statement, but I don't plan to do it. I prefer to seek honest employment, so I will either go on welfare or try to get a job somewhere and maybe become a bank dick or something like that, or a stand-up comedian.
Someone had remarked he might even take up belly dancing.
Yeah, well, yes. I don't know that anyone would pay to see my belly, but if that is the case, I'm certainly happy to try it.
Doing the original audio tape interview with Tony Bouza back in the 1980s was just such a good time. I appreciated what he said when I thanked him for being with me.
You really are a charming man, Tony Bouza, and I want to thank you again for sharing this time with me. I'm sorry to see our time's gone by.
Well, I want to thank you most especially for giving me this opportunity to speak today with my fellow citizens, and I think it was just delightful of you to do it, and I'm happy to do it.
As I said, spending the time with him was a pleasure. I also have enjoyed this time spent with you viewers that tuned in today. Looking forward to our next time together. This is Maxie Dingwall saying bye for now.